What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you a video about an upcoming cRPG called The Necromancer's Tale. As the name might imply, this is a story about becoming a proper necromancer in an alternative history 1700s, around the area of Venice to be specific. But right off the bat, as you can probably tell, this is of course an indie title, and while it is set to release a little later this year in Q4 of 2024, the demo that I'm bringing you this footage with has been out for a little while and reflects an alpha build of the game. Which is important to mention simply because obviously things will have progressed since then, and I imagine stuff like the UI, etc. might be refined and hopefully improved along the way, which essentially means if you try that demo out for yourself, keep in mind that it's an alpha version and thus prone to things like bugs, unfinished content, etc. But from there, let's actually fully dive into this thing. While this cRPG does feature turn-based combat, it is first and foremost a narrative-driven experience. We play as a minor noble during the 1700s, who slowly but surely gets drawn into dark necromantic arts. After arriving home, upon the news of our father's death in our absence, where we find a house in disarray. Your mother has descended into madness in the wake of your father's death. Your house itself is running on fumes with its financial situation very precarious. Things like servants, etc. had to be let go. But perhaps most strange of all, your character finds a secret tome, a dark spell book filled with all sorts of strange incantations which hint at some of your powers to be gained along your path. But before even that, there's your introduction to the game and how you make your character. So this is done through an interactive prologue that effectively sets the stage, or you can just choose to skip it and pick your stats the normal way. But this interactive prologue will walk you through the initial events of the game, specifically the events that led to armies of the undead being raised in order to fight a war in previous times. Following this war, you became the child of one of the generals who won that war, and the prologue walks you through some of your early life events. What you choose here ultimately determines your stats if you don't want to do it manually, with each of these stats representing various skill checks that you're going to run into throughout the game proper. Now, at the beginning of each chapter, at least here in the demo, you're given a certain amount of energy points, and these energy points can be used to allow you to pass checks you otherwise don't have the skills for, but because they're limited, you obviously can't rely on that and have to use your skills instead. But beyond just those, as you progress through the game, you'll also start picking up, of course, powers to use in combat. First and foremost, naturally, the ability to raise various forms of the undead, alongside casting a few different spells to affect the battlefield at the same time. But because this is the 1700s, you also have access to some basic weaponry to include melee and ranged options. Thus far, combat seems pretty simple, as you might expect, especially in the early game where you don't have these minions, but effectively your character has action points and magic points which allow them to use their abilities or magic, respectively. But probably your most important spell in the long run is your ability to command your undead minions, forcing them to move and attack and do what you need them to. Now, the combat in the demo only gives us access to 3 of a total of 10 planned spells, as well as a handful of necromantic minions, so it's a little hard to get a full scope of the combat system, as it seems pretty bare bones here. But I think as long as they nail the fantasy of being a necromancer, it'll be good enough for what the rest of this game is, which is simply a narrative-heavy title. To that exact end, though, much of the game outside of those combat scenarios is running around talking to people and fulfilling certain objectives around the town you're in. This is going to see you tracking people down in the city, speaking to them, performing tasks for them, exploring, which can lead you to things like gear and items you'll need to sort out individual situations, with a lot of that being told through text. Now, in this demo, a fair bit of it is voice acted, but the voice acting is a little rough, as you might expect of an indie title, so it's hard to say how that will progress over the course of the game and if they'll actually wind up being fully voice acted, etc. I'm not so sure, but it's probably worth a mention that you won't be simply confined to the city. You will eventually get access to more and more fantastical places, which could certainly make for a pretty interesting time all around. So all in all, whether you like narrative heavy games, Necromancer fantasy in general, or just cRPGs like myself, this particular game might be of interest to you. With that said, it still has a slated release for Q4 2024 with no specific release date, and some of my own personal thoughts about this are how much the game has improved since this demo was released almost a year ago, back in October 2023, I believe, and what they've tightened up since then, on top of how strong the narrative is. As I can deal with janky combat systems from an indie cRPG, but if your big selling point is this Necromancer fantasy, the story around that better be pretty solid. And while I think it starts out well enough, especially with things like the voice acting, I'd be very curious to see if they manage to sell that across the entire game, which I think will ultimately be the determining factor of how well this does. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, don't forget to subscribe and stick around, as I will absolutely be checking this one out when it hits its release version. But in the meantime, simply let me know how you feel about this one down in the comment section below, which of course means to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.